I started speaking to Darius a couple months ago and said, man, this guy's got an incredible model. He knows how to get specialists in your office so that it works for the office, it works for the staff, it works for the patients, and it works for everyone around them. And I thought this model has lots of legs. So I wanted to bring Darius here to show you his model. He'll tell you how many states he's in and where he's at in his development. But I think this is one of the answers to one of the questions that you have every day. So Darius, why don't you come on up? All right. All right, bro, you'll be fine. Nice suit too, by the way.
Thank you. Good morning, Dio. My name is Darius Somekhian. I'm the CEO of a company called Synergy Specialists. Our model works in such a way where we act as an agency on behalf of a large group of traveling specialists across the country. We work within the disciplines of oral surgery, exodontia, periodontics, endodontics, and periodontics. We developed a standardized method of being able to market the concept of specialty to GP practices across the country, and we've been able to expand our model to about 160 offices spread over 200 active and inactive specialists. A little bit about myself. I started out in the dental industry at the age of 18. I was selling latex gloves door to door from the trunk of my car, built a dental supply company, acquired by a large distributor about several years ago, worked as a territory rep throughout my tenure for about 2 years with the supply house. And I noticed a few things going on in the industry as we were shifting. A lot of my friends that were graduating from specialty programs across the country came to me and they expressed some of the difficulty they had going and teaming up with GP practices and trying to find associateship positions. We noticed after the recession, around the time that a lot of my friends were graduating from specialty programs, they were coming out trying to find associateship positions. But they realized that a lot of the positions they were looking for, they were far few and none. It was a matter of survival for them. They had to look for work. A lot of these specialists were coming out in their late 20s, early 30s, getting married, trying to pay off student loan debts in excess of $500,000. There's been a major shift that's been happening in the industry for quite some time, and we've noticed it in 5 years of running an agency on behalf of the specialists. What I'm going to share with you today is merely our experience of what we notice being very close with our specialists and the experiences that the offices have had working with our specialists. As many of you are probably doing it right now, incorporating specialty or looking to incorporate specialty, and some of you may not even be doing it at all. I believe this is the future of dentistry. I believe it's a factor of survival for many specialists out there. We recently ran a survey with about 50 of our offices, and I was curious to find out what percentage of patients being referred out for specialty care ended up actually proceeding forward and getting treatment done. They reported that about 6 out of 10 of the patients ended up proceeding with specialty care. That includes, obviously, the patients that showed up for consults. From the 60%, 6 out of 10 that showed up, only about 40% returned back for subsequent restorative care. Now, granted that not all the treatments required subsequent restorative care, the concept was that they were referring out the cases and it was creating some obstacles in the way. There's a few components to referring out specialty that I would say are a deficit. Number one, you're increasing the chances that the patient won't be returning back to the practice. I'm sure many of you have experienced this in the past where you refer a case out and you lose control over the case. There's less of a continuity of communication and what have you. One of our offices contacted us about a few months ago and said he's interested in bringing on board an endodontist. As we built the practice profile for him in what we call an intake, he expressed to me that one of the reasons he wanted to bring on board an endodontist is because there was a patient he had referred out about 6 months ago. Patient comes back in for a post-op checkup, and he notices there's an implant. He says, "Where'd you get the implant done?" He says, "The endodontist that you referred me to did the implant on me." It wasn't so much that the general dentist was upset that the endodontist did a procedure that he could have done himself. It was more so because the patient didn't proceed with the subsequent restorative care and ended up leaving because his insurance was maxed out. When you have specialty in-house, you have more control and better communication to your patients about what transpires with regards to the insurances. I don't want to state the obvious, but there's a loss of production dollars as an opportunity that you're sending out in that sense as well, too. Benefits of establishing a multi-specialty practice from what we see and the feedback that we get from our offices is, number one, it eases the patient's anxiety. Patients being referred out of practices tend to have more anxiety going for specialty care than they would having the procedure done in the familiarity of a practice that they normally go to on a regular basis. Number two, it increases the integrity of a practice. I myself, as a patient, when I show up to a dental practice and I notice in the front of the door there's 2 associates, an oral surgeon, an endodontist, a periodontist, I feel as if there's a stronger foundation to that practice. It's an impression that I have on that practice that brings more of a solidarity in me seeing that this practice has more access care for myself. Number 3, it elevates the patient retention. A couple classic examples would be is if you had an ortho program running with an orthodontist coming in, patients are coming in once a month for an adjustment of their wires and brackets. There's more of a familiarity on the patient's behalf to the practice, and that helps to increase the retention level that you would normally have with that patient or that patient's family. Number 4, you're increasing the patient conversion rates. As a patient, when I am being seen by a specialist in a GP practice and I notice that it's being co-diagnosed by not only the specialist but also the general dentist, it omits some certain errors in my mind thinking, should I even get a second opinion? This, I believe, is most important when developing a multi-specialty practice because I feel that in today's day and age, patients want an all-access convenience of specialty care and dental care. I'm sure many of you have been or have bought from Amazon before. I read an article recently that 65% of every single online order placed online is done through Amazon's portal. It's a monopoly. Why is it that they got so big? In my opinion, I think it's because they provide the convenience to the patient consumer in wanting to have everything within one portal with transparent ratings available as well. In today's day and age, it's the convenience that you're providing to the patients not by referring them out, but by maintaining them in the practice. And all this cannot be possible without a trust behind it. It's a transfer of trust that you're applying when you're referring out for specialty or referring in for specialty. None of this would be possible if you're not able to transfer the trust of the patient that you're referring to the specialist. The patient is going to the specialist because you're recommending that specialist and you're diagnosing the case. Patient's trust is number one in this factor. And I want to tie this in to the brilliance of it all. You don't have to spend a penny to acquire new patients. This model works in such a way where you're working with the existing patient pool that you have in transferring the trust to the specialist that's coming into your practice. As many of you have probably sat down with the CFOs and the bookkeepers of your groups and discussed how much does it cost every single time a new patient contacts my practice. I don't know what that number is. I would venture to say it's about $100, $200 per patient. But with an in-house referral model, you're working with the existing patient pool that you have in developing one of the highest ROIs of chair time that you could produce for your practice, amongst the other benefits. Now, what we like to do when setting up specialty is making sure all the expectations are in line with everybody, including the specialists and the owner doctors. Unbalanced expectations tend to lead to a disconnect between the specialist and the owner doctor. From what we notice, there are reasons why a specialist would want to disconnect working with a GP practice. The number one reason why is because there's a lack of cases, there's a lack of productivity. As many of you know, this model works in such a way where a specialist comes into their practice with the majority of their equipment and instrumentation and what have you, and they work on a percentage of the adjusted production. I've seen many different variations of this where they work on a percentage of the collection, a percentage of the true production. Canceled days, specialists hate it. They look at this when it happens initially where they contact us and they say, hey, maybe this office isn't exactly for me. Unresponsive tendencies from the office, people get busy. This goes the other direction with the specialists as well. Lack of supplies and equipment. For the most part, all the specialists bring in with this sort of itinerant model all of their equipment, but there's a minimal commitment that the host office, the GP, would have to provide several $100s worth of surgical burrs and some bone graft material and what have you. Transitioning. Specialists move. Sometimes they find better opportunities in other parts of the country. Domestic challenges. We have a couple guys that went through it and they ended up moving from one state to another. But by far, the number one reason why a specialist would want to disconnect from a practice is because there's a lack of productivity and lack of cases. Factors attributing to the ROI of specialty are obviously types of insurances accepted. The UCR of the specialist. As many of you probably know, a specialist's UCR fee schedule demands a higher rate than what a GP fee schedule would work with. Number of patients being seen that day, which I think is number one, plays a role into the ROI of the specialty production. The types of cases being referred. We have an oral surgeon that works with us who's in his early 70s, believe it or not, and he's still working 5 days a week. He's in about 20 practices with us. Of the 20 practices he goes to, half of them, they refer not just extractions and some sedation cases, but they also refer some implant cases. He tends to average double the amount of what he would just on days where he's doing extractions. Avoiding cancellations is also key. As a resource center, we like to train our front offices in communicating with patients on applying some sort of non-refundable deposit, a nominal deposit, towards the consult for the specialty day that they're being referred, and they express to the patient that the specialist is coming in that one day a month for specialty treatment. And lastly, the specialist's clinical efficiency. Now, what I mean this in the sense where it's trying to hit a benchmark, a workflow progress for the benchmark. Not every endodontist works at the same pace. Some endodontists work where they need about an hour and a half for a molar. I have a couple endodontists in California that like to work double column, going from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and that plays a role into what their expectation is and their benchmark for scheduling. There's pitfalls with the model that need to be communicated prior. One of the values that we bring to the table is by having all this talked out beforehand and putting everything in a memorandum of understanding to understand how this is all going to work. Post-op care responsibilities for one, who's in charge of uncovering the healing cap after an implant is placed, what happens if an abscess develops, what supplies are required for that day, what's the specialist bringing in that day. These are all peripheries that need to be worked out ahead of time. Online reputation. I think this can go both ways. You can bring on board a specialist that has the worst chairside manner you can imagine because his personality or her personality is just not there. Conversely, this could work the other way around where you bring a specialist that has the most impeccable chairside manner out there. If you have a specialist coming on board that doesn't have the best personality, he or she may upset a patient. Patient leaves a poor Yelp review for your practice. This is a challenge. This can go either way. We like to really understand our specialists to avoid any potential accidental online reputation pitfalls that would arise from it. Like any project that you'd start up, when you're implementing specialty, planning involves measuring. What we like to do is ask the owner doctors to start tracking the number of referrals they're sending out. That plays a key element in being able to understand how productive it will be to start a day a month for specialty. We also ask the offices to look into their charts and to find out how many types of cases they're not currently referring out, but they could be diagnosing. Measuring the specialist's UCR, discussing with the front office manager, these are also key important notes to take in consideration when you're bringing on board specialty. What we like to do is set up a day where the specialist goes in and meets with the hygienist and the front office manager and discusses what a proper referral protocol would be to develop specialty. The frequency of this I'll explain to you what I mean by this. The key to this is consistency. When you're bringing on board a specialist to come a day a month to your practice, it's the consistency of the scheduling that you want to get in order for that specialist to be able to keep them happy. If you overshoot it and you keep it too busy, especially in the beginning months, the specialist feels as if that this is too much of a workload for me and gets overstressed. If you undershoot it and you have too few cases coming in, then you end up connecting it with the number one reason why they would end up disconnecting. So the consistency behind it is key in being able to dial in to the right frequency behind it all. One thing I always thought about when it comes to group practices being able to develop specialty is you have an advantage. One of the advantages is being able to centralize a referring location that's within the radius of several of your practices. By being able to have several locations refer to one, you're able to create a more consistent frequency of scheduling to keep the specialist happy. How to build a strong, positive culture with your specialists. I think it's very important that your associates understand who that specialist is, what they're all about. It plays a key role in their referral pattern of being able to refer for specialty. The way I would set it up, if I was having several locations refer to one, is to get on board the implant company that you choose to have working with your group, and being able to provide an honorarium for the specialist that's coming in once a month to your practice. The honorarium goes towards a quarterly CE program where you get together all of your associates and you start talking about the types of cases that are being referred, and it's like an internal study club in a sense that you're developing. By familiarizing the associates with the specialists, you're enhancing the ability of additional referrals coming in from the satellite locations that you're building. There's 3 types of specialists out there. Number 1, you have your new grad type of specialists that just came out of the program and they have an excess of $500,000 in debt. Second type of specialist is your middle-aged specialist that has private practice for about 15 years, 20 years or so. And he's been noticing the referral pattern has been dwindling down a bit. So they decide they want to start traveling, maybe teaming up with a couple offices, staying in their practice to accept outside referrals on Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, and then Wednesdays and Fridays they start traveling. Third type is the specialist that just sold his practice recently, didn't get as much as he was hoping to get, and wants to keep his fingertips a bit wet, still traveling. Within all 3 types of specialists, they have a difference in the mindset and the necessity of what they're looking for. Mindset and necessity are 2 totally different things out there. The mindset of a new grad coming out of the program is they want to take the world by storm. The necessity of a new grad coming out of the program is they have a tremendous amount of student loan debt. They're looking to start their families. They're looking to start their careers. They have more of a necessity of survival, so their motivation to go and travel and teaming up with 15, 20 practices is a lot higher. A lot of GPs, from what we notice, have difficulty sourcing a good specialist. Number 1, you have to make sure that the specialist is equipped. A typical oral surgery setup can run anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 between the sedation equipment, the surgical motor, implant kits, assortment of implants. It's a lot of stuff. Their determination. Some specialists that we bring on board our network, when we first have our initial talk with them, we can kind of get an idea of how determined they are, which plays a role into their mindset and necessity of how many days they want to pick up, how far they want to travel. These all play a crucial role in their determination. Case presentation ability, that's another factor that is key in being able to find a properly matched specialist. Not every single periodontist out there is able to present a case while they're traveling to other practices with the way they would normally when they're working in their own private referral-based practice. Case presentation ability obviously plays a major role in the ROI of the production for the day. Personality, we like to work with easygoing specialists. I think that's extremely important in being able to develop a long-term relationship. The more easygoing they are, the more flexible they are, you're able to create a more fruitful relationship long-term. Their clinical philosophy, I have an oral surgeon that works with us in Orange County, and he tells me, Darius, don't send me to any offices that don't want to refer implants and extractions. That makes our jobs a little bit more difficult. For the most part, most of our OSs are fine traveling, just doing days with extractions and implants. And of course, egos, my least favorite. If I was setting up a group and I wanted to attract specialists to come in, I would talk to them about what the lifestyle is within that town or that city. I think that's key in being able to attract specialists to come in and join your group. Some groups out there have 10, 20, 30, hundreds of locations, so they have a need for specialists to come in more full-time, and they're in areas that there's not that many itinerant specialists available. We don't like to typically pair up, as we call it, match specialists with offices that are more than an hour and a half maximum distance from the specialist's residence or their own possible private referral-based practice as well. And I think it's important to talk to the specialist about how the lifestyle is going to be in this area if there's a transitionary situation at hand. As many of you probably know, that the traditional compensation model works on a percentage basis. All of our guys work off of a 50% of the adjusted production. They travel with their own equipment. Our OSs travel with their own surgical assistants. Certain costs are shared, like the implant fixture, bone graft, and membrane. I've seen many variations from many group practices out there where they come in and they work off of a lower percentage. What happens eventually is the specialist notices that there's private practices out there paying them a standard 50%, and they say, gosh, well, maybe it's time for me to move on to something that's more lucrative for me. Your competition in being able to attract specialists is actually private practices. Models typically range within certain specialties like OS, perio, and endo, where it's done on a adjusted production. Ortho, which is something we recently started working with and works within a collection-based type of model. One of the things that we like to do when we're onboarding a specialist to a new office is get them together with the whole staff and go over how this is all going to play out. As we act as a resource center on behalf of the specialist, we try to get them together to understand not only the visuals behind case diagnosis, the conversations to have with the patients, while we carry on teaching the front office on how to do the billing and act as a resource to show them all the administrative peripheries around it all. Each specialist has different types of scheduling preferences, of course. What we recommend to many offices is book out the whole next 6 months with the specialist. Have a day-a-month schedule so that way you can tell your specialist, your patients, you can tell your patients what day the specialist is available coming in. Chairside assistant, who's responsible for that? Typically for oral surgery, because it requires a certified, experienced sedation assistant, the oral surgeon usually brings in the assistant. But for other specialties, except for ortho, it's usually the office's assistant that's provided. A lot of our periodontists, at least the really successful ones that we work with, they get together with the hygienist and have a separate coffee meeting session with them. And they discuss putting together a perio referral protocol as well. What types of conversations to have with the patients and so on and so forth. There are groups forming within groups that are led by a particular specialist. A friend of mine leads a group of about 70 to 80 periodontists in 8 different states. He himself is a periodontist as well too. These groups are forming because they're geared towards cultivating and establishing specialty with a mentorship by bringing on board other types of specialists within that specialty. There's pros and cons behind the model, of course. Number one, the pro behind it is that you're establishing your group with specialists that are being trained by a mentorship model. The con behind it is that it's more costly. These guys travel and they charge more of a higher percentage of the production. They do train them on case presentation ability, mentorship by the head of the group. Again, the head of the group is usually a specialist that is a veteran at it who's been doing this for quite some time. Turnover of specialists you have to avoid at all costs. It's costly. Patients don't like it. It's expensive to re-credential the specialist. As many of you probably know, re-credentialing takes months to be activated for the specialty fees. Patients don't like it. A lot of DSOs, we notice, the ones that do it really, really well, they blow it out of the park. The ones that don't do it that well, they have a very high rate of turnover with specialists. There's one group in particular, I don't want to mention their name, but they have about 300 to 400 offices. They reported that 50% of their production comes from specialty. 50% comes from specialty. They're a very specialty-focused type of group. Turnover rate within specialty is something that you need to be able to hit on the nail right from the get-go. When you bring on board a specialist, you got to make sure all the expectations are balanced out and there's a good understanding so you can generate a long-term relationship. Leveling the expectations is really the name of the game when you're bringing them on board. A lot of specialists that come out of the programs, they have more availability than a middle-aged specialist that has been in private practice for some time. And if I was a group practice owner, I would tend to want to go with somebody that has more availability. More availability equals more coverage. We developed a resource center to help offices understand how to run the specialty days. We invested thousands of dollars into putting together all the forms and necessary agreements that they would need to successfully run specialty days. Many of our offices use it. We also created a bio template that we like to print out. And I think that every office should do this that incorporates specialty because it helps to familiarize the patient or the patient's guardian with the specialist that's coming in for that day. By familiarizing the patient with the specialist, you're creating more comfort. When you're creating more comfort, you're increasing the chances that the case is going to be going through. I'm really curious to know what specialties, if any at all, most of you are focused on. As I've been at the conference the past couple of days, it's been really mind-opening for me to hear what the demand is in certain parts of the country for different types of specialties. I can tell you from our perspective, endodontics is the highest in demand specialty that we have coming in from all the GPs calling us. Oral surgery is by far the most productive and, in my opinion, the easiest to onboard. Perio requires somewhat of a culture shift but can be extremely productive. Ortho requires a major commitment. There's many benefits to develop a multi-specialty practice. In summary, I can tell you that overall, it's the way everything is going to be shifting and has been shifting in the past years. From a control of communication of insurances to an increase of the practice revenue and equity, enhancing the integrity of the practice, a higher case acceptance rate, and increasing your patient's comfort and familiarity of the practice. Third-party reimbursements are also higher as well, too. Insurance panels, not all, but many of them, when you contract with a specialist, they end up reimbursing at a higher contracted rate. I firmly believe that there's no office too small to start incorporating specialty. I think that the future of specialty lies within a necessity, not just from the specialist side, but also from the GP side. Specialists are graduating nowadays at the rate of hundreds per year. And the majority of them are looking for jobs outside of the academia realm where they can go and team up with associates, with private specialty-based associates. But they can't find these opportunities. And they need to go and start finding work to create production. I think the larger groups out there can start developing specialty, but need to start doing it in segments. Any questions?
Thank you. All right, let's take some questions from you all here. Who's got a question? Got one in the back there, Angela? About the farthest away we could possibly be.
This is a very common question that comes across our plate very often. Most of the endodontic programs nowadays are training endodontists with only the use of a microscope. The more veteran endodontists they come and tell me, I don't need a microscope. If I was to attract a new grad endodontist to come on board my practice, what I would do is make that investment into buying a microscope. If you look at the ROI of what the endodontist would be able to produce, it's not that much. Now, most of the traveling endodontists that are fully itinerant, who travel with the use of a microscope as a necessity, they bring the microscope themselves. But that microscope tends to require a stand. The stand costs, maybe you could pick one up for $2,000, $3,000 even used, that's compatible with the scope, and avoid breaking the endodontist's back to travel with it.
Hey, Darius, we have a question in the back there.
Thank you. Over here in the back. How you doing, by the way?
Great, thank you.
Great presentation. So I've got two questions. First question is, what are you seeing in terms of the difference of reimbursements on specialists from endo, perioral surgery based on collections? And then the second question, are you seeing any DSO groups or group practices incorporating prosthodontists to bill a specialty fee for the common procedures that GPs are doing?
A lot of the insurance panels reimburse at higher rates. In California, for example, Delta PPO covers about $2,200 for in-network for oral surgery for 4 wisdom teeth, plus an additional $550 for the first hour of sedation. Total about $2,700. I know this may vary from state to state, but specialty fees they're demanded at a higher rate, not only from the third-party payers, but also from a patient's understanding that they're being treated by a specialist as well. In answer to your second question, I haven't really seen groups other than the Clear Choices of the world incorporate prosthodontics. Most of the GP practices out there feel that there's not enough cases to support a prost to come in.
Oh, can you hear me? Sorry, maybe I didn't speak clearly on my question a little bit. So question part number one was, how do you see the reimbursement of, for example, a periodontist who might get 40% of collections versus an oral surgeon who might ask for 50% of collections? Do you see that difference at all among specialists? And then the second question again is using a prosthodontist as a GP, not so much for, all on fours and all that stuff, but just bill a crown fee, bill a filling fee because their fees are higher.
Right. From what we notice, different markets around the country have a variation of saturation of available specialists out there. Obviously, going with the law of supply and demand, when you have more specialists within that specialty in one saturated area, you're able to bring in a periodontist, for example, at a lower rate. In Southern California, I can tell you that the perio market is extremely saturated. So oftentimes I do notice once in a while where an office tells me that their previous periodontist they had coming in, they were working off of a 40 to 45% platform. It's a direct variation to the saturation of available specialists who are willing to travel. In answer to your second question, I think it's a brilliant idea to bring in a prost to do GP work on a day-to-day basis. I don't notice most groups doing it. I think the availability of prosthodontists out there is far few and none, so it would be a huge advantage for a group to bring on board a prost for general work. We have an office overseas, both in the Philippines and also in Bangladesh. Great team of people that work with us since we started the company. Our Bangladesh office is in charge of marketing. I have about 15 people just working full-time on LinkedIn and Facebook, helping out with recruitment efforts. And as we're recruiting resumes of different specialists out there based on where we see the demand, we start communicating with them and doing our own type of interviews with them. For orthodontia, we just launched this model recently. The way we felt would be more appropriate to start it is by requesting from the orthodontist what is their baseline per diem that they're looking to get as a guarantee for the day. My recommendation on implementing orthodontics within a practice is figuring out a game plan of how to tie in the orthodontist to want to stay long term. Because the last thing you want is a year down the line, you start running 40, 50 ortho cases once a month, and the orthodontist says, I'm going to the next bigger thing. Without sacrificing any practice equity, you'd want to set it up where you give them some sort of nominal skin in the game. Let's say around 25 to 30% of the revolving collections that come through, and cover the supply costs along with the instrumentation costs as well. How do you charge for referring a specialist? We don't. We're not a nonprofit, we're for profit. The specialists cover our time to act as a resource in helping them find offices like yours. Can you share with us what your collection-based ortho model compensation is? Okay, we just went over that one. This is a good question. How do you reprimand a specialist that acts like a jerk and hurts the practice you referred him to? Everybody has a bad day out there. A lot of my closest friends are traveling oral surgeons, and they typically have some of the most stressful days that you could imagine. What I notice is that, well, let me first say this. The specialists don't work for us. We work for them. We're an IC, independent contractor of the specialist. Then they are an IC of your practices in that sense. So technically, I can't reprimand them. But what we do notice is that because they're working under our umbrella, they don't want to end up losing the ability to get more days and more offices from us. So the offices that we help team them up with, they tend to be on their best behavior in that sense. Not to mention, we've been doing this long enough where initially the first 30 minutes that we're talking to a specialist, we get a decent picture as to how this is all going to come to fruition for them long term with us. I think I got most of the questions.
Any other questions around? We got one more here.
Oh, here's another one that came through.
Got you right here, Darius.
If the specialist is in network for certain insurances in their private practice, what if the office they travel to has a different number of insurances that they're in network for? How is that billing managed?
Credentialing is location sensitive. A specialist can be, it's a big misnomer actually in the dental industry. Offices call us and they say, oh, can you check to see if this oral surgeon is in network with this plan, this plan, this plan? But it's location sensitive. The only difference is you need to fill out a few less pages within the credentialing application. All the third-party payers credential based on the EIN and the practice location underneath the MPI of the specialist. So the checks come to the practice. Biggest challenge is when a patient needs a couple of restorations and then surgical extractions when the annual maximum for insurance is $1,500. Does medical insurance treatment covered provided by an oral surgeon? It does. We don't advise on doing medical billing simply because we haven't gotten into that yet before, but a lot of my friends that are surgeons with their own private practices and are also traveling, they tell me that the reimbursements that they get from medical insurances are fairly high, and they're billing them all out of network. Do you notice more GPs trying to perform specialty cases? Absolutely. We notice many GPs are starting to perform specialty cases, which is great because the whole concept is maintaining the cases in-house. we're taking a platform where we're also not just recruiting specialists, but we're trying to recruit GPs that are proficient in a certain area of dentistry. Like, for example, we have a couple exodontists in California that travel just pulling third molar wisdom teeth extraction all day long on local and nitrous. I do notice a lot of GPs out there that are practice owners trying to do a lot of their complicated cases themselves too. But it's important to know that you don't want to get yourself in trouble. You don't want to end up in a scenario where you have an outside oral surgeon that you're working with and you end up taking on a couple complicated extractions, or your associate takes on some of the complicated extractions, and you start referring a root tip fracture to the oral surgeon down the street, and he's like, what are you doing? Kind of scenario. Question that came across: why do you choose to ignore pediatric dentistry? We don't know how to incorporate it yet. We believe that at the stage of our company that we're at now, we like to standardize everything that we set up, and we haven't figured out a standardized method to incorporate pediatric dentistry within GP practices across. We will eventually get into it. I wouldn't say we're ignoring it, but we're looking forward to diving into pediatric realm soon. I'm not wearing my contacts today, so they gotta blow it up for me here. How do you handle office site licensing for sedation? Good question. Each state has a different regulation in terms of the credentialing process, I'll call it, when you need to get licensed for sedation. Some states are location sensitive, other states are not. In Texas, for example, if we onboarded an oral surgeon on board a group for 8 locations, and the oral surgeon calls me up and said, the DEA registration fee for each location is $800. Can you ask the GP practice to pony up at least half? It adds up. 8 locations times $800 a location, it can turn out to be $6,400. What we think is fair is to split the cost of the registration. Now, in many states, it's not location sensitive. In California, for example, almost every single one of the OSs travel with 1 GA permit. Are specialists employees or independent contractors? Specialists are independent contractors. If a specialist was to work for a specialty practice, there would be an argument that could be made where the associate specialist would be classified as a W-2. But from what we see and from what our general counsel tells us, and it's very traditional and routine for specialists to work as an IC status underneath a GP practice. Do we see oral implantology as a subspecialty? Absolutely. It's obviously non-ADA accredited, but we do have a team of GPs that are very proficient in not just extractions, but implant dentistry as well. Some of them lecture for some of the major implant companies out there: Noble Biocare, Straumann, BioHorizon. Our periodontist in Phoenix actually is a speaker for BioHorizon. Do you offer full-time placement of specialists? We do. We have an agreement with all the specialists that if an office chooses to, or a group chooses to bring on board a specialist full-time, we allow them to have an exit clause to work with them full-time. Thereby, we would be functioning in that sense as a straight recruiter with whatever help we can provide for that group. I love the questions, by the way. These are all pretty common questions that come across our plate as we're incorporating specialty with offices. If your specialist gets sued, are you liable as the office within which they worked? All the specialists carry their own independent malpractice policy. There was a recent article that was released with TDIC, one of the major insurance carriers, where it overviewed and explained that an itinerant specialist carries their own malpractice policy, which would cover themselves separate from the office practice policy. Luckily, we've never had a scenario like that before, because every situation can be controlled, I'm sure as many as you know. Here's a question I came across is, how long does insurance credentialing take, and what do you do with the doctor during this time? This is a very, very good question, because tying into the number one reason why a specialist would not want to continue working at a practice is the lack of productivity, lack of cases. We like to set the expectations straight in the beginning, not just by the specialist, but also the owner doctor, as to how productive it can be given there's a time frame for insurances to go into effect. I know with Delta Dental, for example, when you're billing out of network, the patient gets the check. So it's not really convenient to start chasing down the patient for the reimbursement, so you need to wait for Delta to go into effect. The average timeline it could take for the PPO panels to go into effect can be anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 months. The HMOs can take upwards to 6 months. We handle all the credentialing for all the offices with our location in the Philippines. We have staff that is knowledgeable in filling out all the forms with us having a QC control, double checking them before they're sent out. And they help us by calling the panels every single week, asking for their approval to come through. So initially, I like to set the level of expectation where you can even start off with like a half day. Where the specialist comes in a half day, understanding that there's a timeline for the credentialing process to take place and what have you. How do you know that you're ready for a specialist? What is the threshold for your referral rate to make it appropriate? This is somewhat of an open-ended question because depending on the specialty that you'd like to start and incorporate, an example would be oral surgery. Most oral surgeons are looking for a full day of production. So what I like to tell the GPs is, don't just line up some extractions. Don't just line up some wisdom teeth extractions. Try to sprinkle on some implant cases as well for them too, because you're trying to keep the specialist happy long-term coming in, and granted, you may have an associate working on a lower percentage of the production, but that small difference on what you're paying for a few of the implant cases would make the world of difference in keeping that OS happy to come in long-term. Remember, the name of the game is consistency when you're trying to keep the specialist happy coming in. Do any of the specialists accept Medicaid? Yeah, a lot of them do. It really boils down to what their, if you remember back to my presentation, their necessity and mindset is. I'd venture to say that most of the newer grads are willing to accept Medicaid, because in certain states there's, as many of you know, a variety of reimbursements. In California, the reimbursement is on the bottom scale for Medicaid. Texas being probably second or third highest. So if I was just to speak on the states that had the lower reimbursing Medicaid programs, then I can tell you that it's more suited for the newer grads, because the more veteran guys are probably booked up and they have lower availability, and they're looking for offices that are more PPO fee-for-service based. How much time do you spend vetting specialists? I think this is one of the keys to our success, because we spend a lot of time in understanding like who the specialist is, what their needs are. we created a database of all of our specialists and knowing what implant system they use, what is their secondary implant system, how much they're paying per each fixture, how far they're willing to travel, what is their average expected production, and what have you. Understanding your specialist when you're bringing them on board is key. You got to level out the expectations to avoid any potential disconnect with everything. We are not credentialed with some of the PPO insurance and still see them. With specialty service like oral surgery, do we need to be credentialed? I personally, as a patient, if I was going into my dental practice and I was being referred to be seen by the oral surgeon, I would go in network with the plans, because it makes things a bit easier for the patient, and plus the fees that you're getting in network are pretty high. Now for endodontics, the way I would structure it is just go in network with, let's say, Delta, one of the third-party payers that makes the out-of-network billing very difficult. And the remainder, just go fee-for-service, because there's only a certain number of procedures that an endodontist can do per day, and they're looking to be as productive as they can. A typical UCR fee schedule for an endodontist for, let's say, a molar is about $1,400, which is about in line with what Delta of California would pay, for example.
I've got a question in regards to specifically a case that I was involved with, where an itinerant oral surgeon did a case in an office. Patient had a complication. The owner dentist of the practice didn't know how to deal with the emergency that came up, was not able to provide access to the oral surgeon who did the case, ended up in the hospital where another oral surgeon dealt with the complication and reported the itinerant oral surgeon for not being available to the patient. How do you deal with that in your contracts with both the office and the itinerant oral surgeon as to who's responsible for postoperative complications?
So the agreements that we put in place together, we call it terms of service. It's a non-binding email disclosure, per se, that we email out as an agreement between the owner GP and the specialist. The understanding that we have formalized is that it's the OS's responsibility to address that post-op case, that pitfall that came about. It's the office's responsibility to obviously notify the surgeon. I know in California, they recently sent out a notice to every single OS stating that if a patient is admitted to a hospital after your care within 24 hours, it's still considered within your jurisdiction, the OS's jurisdiction, to have it handled. And they're required to report it to the board if that case arises within 24 hours. I know those types of situations can be very rare, but nonetheless, it's that one time that it happens that can really cause a lot of problems out there. But every single one of our OSs are under the understanding that their level of post-op communication with the patients, they hold it at very high regard. They don't ignore these kind of issues. And we have coverage too, because we form a group. Most of the surgeons, I get them together on forums to discuss cases with each other. When one guy leaves for vacation for a week, there's another 2 other guys that are available for coverage for them. That's the benefit of being able to create it within a group. Some group practices out there, as they expand to 20, 30, 40 locations, and they have a necessity to bring on board 2, 3, 4 oral surgeons, that's a benefit in terms of coverage for these potential pitfalls that can come about.
Thank you very much, Darius. Very much appreciate it.
Welcome.
All right.
I'm going to bring Chris Sands to the stage. He's one of the partners of ProFi 2020. His other partner, Brent Saunier, is in the back of the room. They have a table right out there. Profi 2020 is really one of the top multidisciplinary CPA firms that we've met in the DSO space. Collectively, Chris and Brent have over 30 years of business experience, and so please have a round of applause for Chris.
Darren, do I have a clicker? Perfect. All right, well, thank you. I know that I am the only thing standing between you and lunch, and I don't know if you can tell by looking at me, but I like lunch a whole lot too. So I'll make this very brief and hopefully give you a few nuggets to take back with you. Profi 2020 is a play on words. We are a dental CPA firm. Profi 2020 is short for providing financial clarity, but the portion of Profi is also a play on the word profi, okay, and preventative care. So keeping your finances clean preventatively. I thought today what I would do, first of all, I want to take this moment to publicly thank Jacob, Darren, Dr. Cooper, all of the DEO staff, the AV team. You guys put on an incredible event every time. It's an awesome environment of collaboration and information and networking that I don't think we can find anywhere else for this space. I thought I would, there was a few quotes that I wrote down from the past few presentations that caught my ear financially, and I thought I'd share them with you real quick as a review. So from Dr. Sulman Ahmed, what I need from you, this is to his private equity management force, what I need from you is an outstanding finance department that understands our growth and future modeling. From Amal, from Patient Prism, the biggest item on your balance sheet is not equipment, it's data. From Maria Maloney, she advised, carefully consider organizational structure and review financial info and operational measures timely. And from the panel yesterday on capital investors, it was said that when people underinvest in corporate infrastructure, private equity may not only want to pay on a lower practice level EBITDA, not the platform corporate EBITDA level. And I found all those statements to be very true and good assertions based on fact. So I thought I'd share some quick facts with you in our presentation. There's so many, I'll go fast enough that if you like, you can get a copy of the presentation as well as a white paper with the metrics that we use in our accounting. If you go to deo.profi2020.com and put your email address in there, and you can get all of that. And then you can also request a free analysis of your accounting records if you like. So are you aware, did you realize that the marketing budget for solo private practitioners is 2% or less of their collections? And the marketing budget for most DSOs that's reported is between 6 to 8%. And in this space of emerging groups, the question is, which one are you acting like? And see, we get to look under the hood of the vehicle and see the numbers and see what you're really doing. Are you talking the talk only, or are you walking the walk? And I think this is, not ordinary advice coming from an accounting firm telling you that you are not spending enough on marketing. Most of this room and the polls that I've had still probably have new patient problems, and that's as a result of not marketing to acquire the proper number of new patients. Frustrations with your overhead and for your team costs is like the most common comment. That is directly correlated to the amount that you are reinvesting into marketing or not. So when someone comes to me and they say, I'm worried because I have 45% team cost, I know when I look at the line for marketing and advertising, I'm only going to see 1 or 2%. Okay, and that's kind of the rub. So how do you find, if you're short on cash, which is also another problem in the emerging space, how do you find the money to market? So next I would ask you to ask yourself what you do with your other money. Elementary advice, typical advice from just typical CPAs, middle class advice is one of the best things you can be doing for tax deductions is maxing out your retirement plans. And it is important to save, it really is. But I really do see a landscape of being cash poor and not reinvesting in the practice at a level to sustain the growth you need with the rising costs. Do you realize that maxing out $55,000 in your retirement plan, you get the exact same deduction if you put that $55,000 into your practice, okay, into marketing as an example. The question is, what's the return on investment with that? And if you want to see the math on that, we have a handout. If you go to our booth after this, we'll show you that. You can take a picture of it. And you can determine, I promise you, if you did that for 1 year, you would get your same money back that year, and then you could throw it back into the retirement plan. But it'll give you the chance to grow at the level you need. Your dental practice is a better bet than Wall Street. If that wasn't so, corporate dentistry and DSOs would not have been created. That's the reason we're here today. Private equity, business, found a better place to put money that's more controllable when you understand the metrics and you can manipulate them in a positive way to grow the business and to scale. So again, when you are looking, when you get down to it and you get real with yourself, what do your numbers say? Are you making an investment in the most controllable thing that you know, that has the biggest return on investment? So this is a little cutout from a financial statement that we have, and there you see the range there, marketing 3 to 10%. Most dental accounting firms will tell you that range needs to be 2 to 3%, and that's preposterous in order to grow. So again, if you go to that deo.profi2020.com, you can get a full sample of the financials that we put out, and you can go back and look if you have the same chart of accounts or if you need to think about reorganizing those. There's something else that I wanted to put in the slides, but I chose to take out, and so I tell you to write this down. There's also an enormous amount of debt in this room, and we've gotten comments at the booth about, I'm getting these surprise tax bills, and I don't know how they're being created. And what you should write down is that a byproduct of debt is it creates a phantom tax. That's money that you pay taxes on that you didn't take home. Or rephrase that, profit that you paid taxes on that you didn't take home. Have you ever wondered why, an accountant will tell you, great job, you had a great year, you made a lot more money, you had a lot more profit, and you have this tax surprise. You owe $80,000 in taxes, and you're like, well, I don't see the money. I don't think that profit's real. It's paper profit. That's because your debt payments, the principal portion, in the IRS's eyes, you're taking profit and paying down principal, which is not deductible. And so until that debt is gone, there is a byproduct of extra tax, and that creates a tax loop, which then you don't have the capital to pay the tax. You may go into debt again, and then you're in a debt loop. And those are the two loops, the tax loop and the debt loop. Severely slow you down from growing. Probably the conversation that I have the most with everyone I meet is this. If you're a doctor and you're going to perform a procedure on a patient, would you ever perform that procedure without taking an x-ray? That's a clean x-ray that's current and that you can read and use. If you perform a procedure on a patient without an x-ray, that's malpractice. Well, your financial reporting, your profit and loss statement, your balance sheet, your cash flow statement, those are the financial x-ray on your business. And if you make a lot of business decisions just based on the balances in your bank account, and you make those decisions without having a financial x-ray, a proper financial x-ray that's current, accurate, and usable, easily read, you're performing malpractice on your business. I certainly would not want my accountant doing my dentistry, and I would not want my dentist doing my accounting. So the question is, are you doing it yourself, or the person that you're outsourcing it to, are they capable of doing it according to the principles of accounting and giving you the best outcome? So in most cases, especially in the space, I think our niche market space really is practices growing to about 10 locations. And I feel it is our job to graduate them into hiring their own full-time CFO in-house at that point. But until that time, our job is to do that outsourcing, to give that monthly reporting and give you proactive tax advice to get you out of those two loops. And one of the things we say is, maybe you don't need to put this money away lock it up into a retirement account just because of that deduction. Maybe you need to keep the cash on hand. And then this is a graphic. Again, we can send this to you. It's at our booth. But something we put together to kind of compare the cost of a doctor doing the work themselves. That's the bar in red. And that number represents the amount of productivity, collections that you are giving up by doing that. As well as along the top, you see the cost of having a part-time bookkeeper, full-time bookkeeper, and then our fees. This is based on a 3-location practice. So this is the analysis that we give anytime that when we quote our services, we talk to you about what your cost would be to do it alternatively. So again, incredibly honored to be here. Thank you guys so much for having us. We really do appreciate it. We'd love to meet you if we haven't met you already at the booth. Enjoy lunch.
Thank you, sir. All right, so we've got